The sound of a gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Montana Territory, 1878, as Remington Nash stood over the body of the man who had killed his brother. The revolver in his hand still smoked, the pearl handle warm against his palm, the same gun his brother James had carried until his dying day 6 months ago. Remington had sworn vengeance, and now it was done, yet the emptiness inside him only seemed to grow wider. "What now, James?" Remington whispered to the wind, holstering the Colt .45 that had become both his brother's legacy and his own burden. The small town of Silver Creek lay before him, a collection of wooden structures and hopeful souls carving out existence in the untamed West. Remington had been riding for days, tracking his brother's killer across 3 territories. He was tired, his dark hair matted with dust, his blue eyes hollow from lack of sleep. At 30 years old, Remington had seen more death than most men twice his age, starting with his parents when he was just 16 and James was 20. Now, with James gone too, he was truly alone. As Remington guided his chestnut mare down the main street of Silver Creek, he noticed how people averted their eyes. News traveled fast in these parts. Everyone likely knew what he'd done out there in the Badlands. Judge, jury, and executioner, that's what he'd become, and the weight of it sat heavy on his shoulders. The Silver Dollar Saloon beckoned with the promise of whiskey and temporary oblivion. Remington hitched his horse and pushed through the swinging doors, his spurs jingling with each step. The piano player hit a wrong note when Remington entered. The conversations hushed, and all eyes turned to the dust-covered stranger with the haunted expression. "Whiskey," he said to the bartender, his voice rough from disuse. "Leave the bottle." 3 drinks in, Remington was starting to feel the tension ease from his muscles when the saloon doors swung open again. A woman entered unusual enough to draw attention, but it was her confident stride and the determined set of her chin that kept every eye in the place fixed on her. "I'm looking for the sheriff," she announced, her voice clear and steady. She was dressed in practical clothing, a simple dark blue dress with a matching jacket, her auburn hair pinned beneath a modest hat. She wasn't flamboyantly beautiful, but there was something striking about her earnest green eyes and the grace with which she carried herself. The bartender pointed to a table in the corner where the local lawman sat nursing a beer. "Sheriff Miller's over there, madam." As she passed Remington's table, their eyes met briefly. Something in her gaze, a flash of recognition, or perhaps just curiosity, made Remington shift uncomfortably in his seat. He tossed back the rest of his whiskey and signaled for another, trying to ignore the conversation taking place just a few feet away. "Sheriff, I'm Hope Anderson. I've purchased the old Wilkinson property just outside of town. I need to report that someone's been stealing my cattle." Remington couldn't help but overhear. A woman alone running a ranch? It wasn't unheard of, but it was unusual, especially in these parts. "Mrs. Anderson, I'm afraid I don't have the manpower to patrol private property," the sheriff replied, not even bothering to stand. "Perhaps you should consider selling the place. A woman alone can't manage a ranch that size." Hope's spine stiffened visibly. "I'm perfectly capable of managing my ranch, Sheriff. What I can't do is be in 2 places at once when rustlers are targeting my livelihood." The sheriff shrugged. "I'll keep an ear out, madam, but that's all I can promise." Remington watched as the woman Hope squared her shoulders and turned away from the sheriff's table. Their eyes met again as she walked toward the exit, and this time there was something different in her gaze. A challenge, perhaps, or an assessment. Outside, as Remington was untying his horse, he heard a frustrated sigh. Hope Anderson was struggling with a stubborn gelding that refused to cooperate. "Trouble, madam?" Remington found himself asking before he could think better of it. "Nothing I can't handle," she replied, though the horse chose that moment to sidestep nervously, nearly pulling her off her feet. "That's quite a spirited animal," Remington observed, moving closer. "Mind if I help?" Hope hesitated, eyeing him warily. "I don't know you, mister." "Remington Nash," he offered, touching the brim of his hat. "Just passing through." "The gunslinger who just killed Jake Simmons out in the Badlands," she said, recognition dawning in her eyes. It wasn't a question. Remington's hand instinctively moved to rest on his brother's gun. News travels fast. "It does when the man killed was in business with half the ranchers in the territory," Hope said, her voice even. There was no fear in her eyes, only a cool assessment. "He killed my brother," Remington said simply. "Had it coming." Hope studied him for a long moment. "Maybe so. But what will your vengeance grow now that you've planted it in blood?" The question struck Remington like a physical blow. Before he could respond, Hope had somehow calmed her horse and mounted it in one smooth motion. "Good day, Mr. Nash," she said, and rode off, leaving Remington standing in the street with a strange feeling that their paths would cross again. The next morning, Remington woke in his rented room above the saloon with a pounding headache and the unsettling realization that he had nowhere to go. For months, his only purpose had been hunting down Jake Simmons. Now that was done, and the emptiness that followed was vast and terrifying. Over a sparse breakfast at the town's only cafe, Remington overheard two ranchers discussing cattle rustlers that had been plaguing the area. The name Anderson came up, along with derisive comments about a widow woman trying to run a ranch on her own. "She's asking for trouble, moving onto that land after what happened to her husband," one of the men said. "That place is cursed, if you ask me." "What happened to her husband?" Remington found himself asking, drawing surprised looks from the ranchers. "Got himself shot in a dispute over water rights," the older rancher explained. "About a year ago, over in Wyoming territory. The widow just showed up here a couple months back, bought the old Wilkinson place with cash money." Remington nodded thoughtfully, finishing his coffee. Before he knew what he was doing, he'd rented a horse from the livery stable and was asking directions to the Anderson ranch. The property was about 5 miles outside of town, a modest spread nestled against the foothills. As Remington approached, he saw Hope Anderson herself mending a section of fence, her hair tied back with a bandana, her sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-freckled forearms. She looked up at the sound of his horse, one hand moving to the pocket of her apron, where, Remington guessed, she kept a small firearm. "Mr. Nash," she acknowledged, straightening up. "Following me now?" "Heard you might need some help," Remington said, dismounting. "I'm good with cattle and better with a gun." Hope wiped sweat from her brow, leaving a streak of dirt across her forehead. "And why would a man who just finished his vendetta want to work as a ranch hand?" Remington removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "Truth is, madam, I don't have anywhere else to be, and it seems to me you could use the help." Hope studied him, her green eyes narrowed against the sun. "I can't pay much. Room, board, and whatever you think is fair," Remington replied. "I don't need another gunslinger bringing trouble to my door, Mr. Nash." Remington touched the pearl handle of his brother's gun. This was about justice for my brother, nothing more." "Is that what you tell yourself?" Hope asked, her voice soft but challenging. That violence solves problems rather than creating new ones. It solved the problem of the man who gunned down my brother living free while James was in the ground, Remington said, an edge creeping into his voice. Hope sighed, leaning on her fence post. I lost my husband to men who thought guns solved problems too, Mr. Nash, so you'll forgive me if I'm not impressed by your justice. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their respective losses hanging in the air between them. I'm a good ranch hand, Remington finally said, and I know how to protect what's yours without necessarily using this. He tapped his holster. Hope considered him for a long moment. 1 week trial. You sleep in the bunkhouse, any trouble, and you're gone. That night, as Remington settled into the empty bunkhouse clearly built for a crew Hope couldn't afford to hire, he found himself thinking about the widow Anderson. There was something about her directness, her refusal to be intimidated, that reminded him of James. His brother had always faced the world head-on, with a clear sense of right and wrong. The next morning came early, with Hope knocking on the bunkhouse door before dawn. Cattle need moving to the south pasture, she announced through the door. Breakfast is in the kitchen when you're ready. Remington dressed quickly and made his way to the main house, a modest 2-story structure that had seen better days but was clean and well kept. In the kitchen, Hope was frying bacon and eggs, her hair still in a simple braid down her back. You know your way around cattle, she asked, setting a plate in front of him. Grew up on a ranch in Texas, Remington said, nodding his thanks for the food. My pa ran cattle until he passed, then James took over. And what happened to the family ranch? Hope asked, sitting down across from him with her own plate. Remington's jaw tightened. Lost it. Bad drought, worse loans. James and I took to driving other men's cattle after that, made a decent living until... He trailed off, not needing to finish. Hope nodded, understanding in her eyes. My husband Henry and I had a small place in Wyoming. Nothing grand, but it was ours. After he died, I couldn't stay there. Too many memories, too many neighbors who looked at me with pity. So you came here to start fresh, Remington said. Something like that, Hope replied, a shadow crossing her face. Finish up. We've got work to do. Over the next few days, Remington fell into a rhythm on the Anderson ranch. The work was hard, but satisfying, mending fences, moving cattle, repairing outbuildings that had fallen into disrepair. Hope worked alongside him most days, her knowledge of ranching clearly hard-won but thorough. In the evenings they would sit on the porch, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. Remington found himself watching Hope when she wasn't looking the way the setting sun caught the auburn highlights in her hair, the small smile that sometimes played around her lips when she was lost in thought. Tell me about your brother, Hope said one evening, as they sat watching a spectacular sunset paint the Montana sky. Remington's hand automatically went to the gun at his hip. James was the best man I ever knew. Fair, honest, strong. He practically raised me after our parents died. Never complained about it either. How did he die? Hope asked softly. Jake Simmons shot him in the back during a card game in Dodge City, Remington said, his voice tight. James caught him cheating, called him on it. Simmons pretended to back down, then pulled a hidden derringer when James turned away. Hope was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry for your loss, Remington. Truly. But did killing Simmons bring your brother back? No, Remington admitted, but it was the right thing to do. The law wasn't going to touch him. He had too many friends in high places. And now? What's the right thing to do now? Hope asked, her eyes reflecting the dying light of the sunset. Before Remington could answer, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders were coming up the road to the ranch house, their silhouettes dark against the twilight sky. Hope stood, tension evident in every line of her body. "Trouble," she murmured. Remington rose as well, his hand instinctively going to his gun. "Friends of yours?" "Hardly," Hope replied. "That's Harold Blackwater and his boys. He's been trying to buy my land since I arrived. Doesn't take kindly to being refused." The riders pulled up in front of the house, and Remington got his first good look at Harold Blackwater, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a florid face and cold eyes. The 2 younger men flanking him were clearly his sons, their resemblance to their father unmistakable. "Evening, Mrs. Anderson," Blackwater called, not bothering to dismount. "I see you've hired some help. Smart move, though it won't save this failing enterprise." "My ranch isn't for sale, Mr. Blackwater," Hope said firmly. "Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." Blackwater's eyes shifted to Remington. "And who might you be, mister?" "Just a hand," Remington replied mildly, though he didn't move his hand from where it rested on his gun. "Well, just a hand. You should know you're working for a stubborn woman who doesn't recognize when she's beaten," Blackwater said, his tone conversational but his eyes hard. "This land has been part of Blackwater Ranch for generations. My father leased it to old man Wilkinson out of kindness. It was never meant to be sold off." "I have the deed, Mr. Blackwater," Hope said. "Properly registered with the territorial authorities, this land is mine, fair and square." Blackwater spat on the ground. "Paperwork can be changed, Mrs. Anderson. Accidents happen, especially to women living alone in these parts." Remington stepped forward. His posture relaxed, but his eyes deadly serious. "She's not alone anymore." Something in Remington's tone made Blackwater pause. He studied Remington more carefully, recognition dawning in his eyes. "You're that gunslinger, the one who tracked down Jake Simmons." "I am," Remington confirmed. Blackwater exchanged glances with his sons. "Well, well. Hired yourself a killer, Mrs. Anderson. That doesn't seem your style." "Mr. Nash is a ranch hand, nothing more," Hope said, though Remington noticed she didn't step away when he moved closer to her side. "For now," Blackwater said, gathering his reins, "but hired guns come and go. This land issue isn't going away, Mrs. Anderson. Think about my offer, it's more than generous." With that, Blackwater and his sons turned their horses and rode off into the gathering darkness. "Are they the ones stealing your cattle?" Remington asked once they were out of earshot. Hope sighed, the tension leaving her shoulders. "Almost certainly, though I can't prove it. Blackwater owns the largest spread in the county. He's not used to being told no." Remington nodded thoughtfully. "We'll need to set up watches, catch them in the act." "We?" Hope raised an eyebrow. "Your week is almost up, Mr. Nash." Remington met her gaze. "I'm not leaving you to face them alone." Something shifted in Hope's expression, a softening, perhaps, or a recognition. "Why do you care what happens to me or this ranch?" Remington looked out at the land, the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Maybe I'm tired of destruction. Maybe I'd like to help build something for a change." That night, Remington took the first watch, sitting on the porch with a rifle across his knees. The moon was full, casting silver light across the pastures. It was peaceful, the kind of peace he hadn't known in the month since James died. Around midnight, Hope came out with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Remington and sat beside him on the porch steps. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Not with Blackwater making threats," she admitted, cradling her cup. "Besides, it seemed unfair to let you keep watch alone." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their coffee. "Your husband," Remington finally said. "What was he like?" A small smile touched Hope's lips. "Henry was kind, gentle. He loved poetry. Can you believe that? A rancher who could recite Wordsworth from memory." "How did you meet?" "At a town social in Laramie. I was teaching at the local school. He asked me to dance, then spent the whole time talking about the beauty of the Wyoming skies compared to the words of some English poet I'd never heard of." Hope's smile widened at the memory. "I thought he was the strangest cowboy I'd ever met. By the end of the evening, I was half in love with him." "He sounds like a good man," Remington said softly. "He was," Hope agreed. "Too good for the way he died." Her voice hardened. "Shot over a water dispute that could have been settled peacefully if men didn't always reach for their guns first." Remington felt the weight of his brother's gun on his hip. "Sometimes there's no other choice." "There's always a choice," Hope said firmly. Henry believed that. He refused to carry a gun, even after the threat started. Said once a man starts down that path, it's hard to find his way back. "And look where it got him," Remington said, immediately regretting the words when he saw the pain flash across Hope's face. "I'm sorry. That was cruel." "But honest," Hope acknowledged. "Yes, Henry died because he wouldn't fight violence with violence, but he died as the man he chose to be, not the man others tried to force him to become. There's honor in that, don't you think?" Remington had no answer. They finished their coffee in silence, watching the moonlit landscape together until Hope finally stood. "Get some rest, Remington. I'll take over the watch." "I'm fine," he protested. "You've been up since dawn. Even gunslingers need sleep." There was a gentleness in her tone that took any sting from the words. Reluctantly, Remington handed her the rifle and went to the bunkhouse, though sleep was long in coming. The next few days passed in a tense rhythm of work and watchfulness. Remington and Hope took turns keeping an eye on the herd, but the rustlers, if Blackwater's men were indeed responsible, seemed to be biding their time. On the fourth night after Blackwater's visit, Remington was patrolling the north pasture when he heard the distinctive sounds of cattle being moved. Silently, he made his way through the trees bordering the field and spotted 3 men on horseback, quietly driving a dozen of Hope's cattle toward the property line. Remington's first instinct was to draw his gun, but Hope's words echoed in his mind. "There's always a choice." Instead, he mounted his horse and rode hard back to the ranch house. Hope was already awake, as if she'd sensed something was wrong. "Rustlers?" she asked as Remington swung down from his horse. 3 men, north pasture. They're taking about a dozen head." Remington checked his gun automatically. "If we hurry, we can catch them before they cross into Blackwater's land." Hope nodded, already moving toward the barn. "I'll saddle my horse." They rode out together, Remington leading the way. As they approached the north pasture, he signaled for Hope to hang back while he scouted ahead. The rustlers were still moving slowly, careful to keep the cattle quiet. In the moonlight, Remington could clearly make out the younger Blackwater sons. The third man was unfamiliar, probably a hired hand. Remington circled back to where Hope waited. "It's Blackwater's boys, all right. We need to decide how to handle this. We catch them in the act, force them to return the cattle, and report them to the sheriff," Hope said firmly. "And if they resist? If they draw on us," Remington asked, his hand resting on his gun. Hope's expression was resolute. Then we defend ourselves. But only if necessary, Remington. I won't have blood spilled on my land if there's any other way. Remington nodded slowly. All right, we'll do it your way. But stay behind me, and if I tell you to ride, you ride. Understood? Hope hesitated, then nodded. Understood. They rode forward together, approaching the rustlers from the side so the cattle wouldn't be spooked. Remington purposely made enough noise to alert the men to their presence, but kept his hand well away from his gun. Evening, gentlemen, he called as they came into view. Bit late for moving cattle, isn't it? The Blackwater boys wheeled their horses around, hands dropping to their guns. The third man, clearly surprised, nearly fell from his saddle. These cattle seem to have wandered onto Blackwater land, the older son Ethan said smoothly. We're just returning them to their proper pasture. That's mighty neighborly of you, Remington replied, his tone casual but his eyes hard. But as Mrs. Anderson's ranch hand, I can assure you these cattle haven't wandered anywhere. They're exactly where they belong. Hope moved up beside Remington. You're stealing my cattle, Ethan. You and your brother both. What would your father say about his sons being caught red-handed as common rustlers? The younger brother, Caleb, flushed with anger. You calling us thieves, woman? If the brand fits, Hope replied steadily. Ethan's expression darkened. You've got no proof. It's our word against yours. And in this territory, the Blackwater name means something. So does the law, Remington said. Cattle rustling is a hanging offense. Are you boys really ready to risk that? The brothers exchanged uneasy glances. Their hired hand was already backing his horse away, clearly wanting no part of what was unfolding. Now, Remington continued, you have two choices. You can turn those cattle around and drive them back to Mrs. Anderson's pasture, or you can draw those guns you're fingering and see if you're faster than I am. For a tense moment, Remington thought the young men might choose the latter option. Caleb, in particular, seemed eager to prove himself, but Ethan, after a careful assessment of Remington's calm demeanor, apparently thought better of it. We were just having some fun, Ethan finally said, forcing a laugh. No harm done, right? We'll return your cattle, Mrs. Anderson. No need to involve the law. This time, Hope agreed, though her tone made it clear there wouldn't be a next time. Under Remington and Hope's watchful eyes, the Blackwater boys turned the cattle around and drove them back to the north pasture. When the last cow had been returned, Ethan tipped his hat with mock politeness. You've made an enemy of my father, Mrs. Anderson. He doesn't forget such things. Neither do I, Hope replied evenly. Tell your father that if any more of my cattle go missing, I won't be so generous. Next time, we go straight to the territorial marshal. The brothers rode off, muttering between themselves. When they were gone, Hope let out a long breath, her shoulders sagging slightly with relief. That could have gone badly, she admitted, turning to Remington. Thank you for not drawing your gun. Remington nodded, surprised to realize he hadn't even been tempted to. Your husband would have been proud of how you handled that. Hope's smile was small but genuine. Yes, I think he would have been. She studied Remington thoughtfully. And your brother? What would James have thought? Remington considered the question seriously. James was quick to defend what was right, but he wasn't bloodthirsty. He would have approved of standing firm without escalating. They rode back to the ranch house side by side, the night peaceful around them. Remington found himself acutely aware of Hope's presence, the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her, the graceful way she sat her horse, the quiet strength she exhibited. At the house, as they unsaddled their horses, Hope turned to him. "You should know that Blackwater won't give up. Tonight was just the beginning." "I figured as much," Remington replied, "but neither will we." Hope smiled at his use of we, a warmth in her eyes that Remington hadn't seen before. "No, I suppose we won't." The following day, they rode into town together to speak with the sheriff. As expected, he was reluctant to act against the Blackwater family on what he termed flimsy evidence, but Remington's reputation lent weight to their complaint. In the end, the sheriff agreed to pay a visit to the Blackwater ranch to issue a warning. "It won't stop them," Hope said as they left the sheriff's office, "but it might make them think twice about being so bold." "That's all we need for now," Remington agreed. "Time to strengthen your position." They spent the day in town, purchasing supplies and speaking with other small ranchers who, it turned out, had also suffered losses they suspected were due to the Blackwaters. By the time they headed back to the ranch, Hope had arranged a meeting of the smaller landholders to discuss forming a protective association. "Strength in numbers," she explained as they rode. "If we all stand together, even Harold Blackwater will have to take notice." Remington found himself admiring her strategic thinking. "You're quite the tactician, Mrs. Anderson." Hope laughed, the sound bright in the late afternoon sun. "I taught school for 5 years before I married Henry." "You learn a thing or two about managing territory disputes when you're supervising a room full of children." That evening, as they sat on the porch after dinner, Remington found himself studying Hope's profile in the fading light. There was a quiet dignity about her, a resilience that he found increasingly attractive. "What will you do when this is resolved?" Hope asked suddenly. "Where will you go?" The question caught Remington off guard. He hadn't thought beyond protecting Hope and her ranch. "I don't know," he admitted. "I haven't had much of a plan since James died. Vengeance was all I could see." "And now?" Remington's hand went to his brother's gun, a gesture that had become almost unconscious. "Now, I'm not sure, but I know I'm not ready to leave here just yet." Hope's gaze dropped to the pearl-handled Colt. "That was your brother's gun, wasn't it?" Remington nodded. "James won it in a shooting competition in Abilene, was so proud of it, said it was the finest piece he'd ever owned." "And you've carried it since his death," Hope observed. "Carried his burden of vengeance, too." "It was mine to carry," Remington said firmly. Hope reached out, her fingers lightly brushing his where they rested on the gun. "And now that the vengeance is fulfilled, is it still yours to carry, Remington? Or is it time to lay down that burden?" The touch of her hand sent a jolt through Remington. He looked up, meeting her eyes, seeing in them a compassion and understanding that struck him to his core. "I don't know how," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Hope's fingers curled around his. "Maybe that's something we can figure out together." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Then Hope gently withdrew her hand and stood. "It's getting late. I should turn in." Remington watched her go, feeling as though something fundamental had shifted in his world. Over the next 2 weeks, the alliance of small ranchers began to take shape under Hope's guidance. They organized regular patrols of their boundaries and agreed to come to each other's aid if needed. The cattle rustling stopped, at least temporarily, though Blackwater continued to make his displeasure known through veiled threats and economic pressure. Through it all, Remington remained at Hope's side, no longer just a hired hand but a true partner in her struggle. And with each passing day, he found himself more drawn to her intelligence, her principled approach to conflict, her quiet strength. They fell into a comfortable routine, working side by side during the day, talking late into the evening. Remington told her stories of growing up in Texas, of the adventures he and James had shared. Hope spoke of her years as a teacher, of her love for literature that her husband had shared, of her dreams for the ranch. And each night, when they parted ways, Hope to the main house, Remington to the bunkhouse, he found it harder to leave her. One evening, as a summer storm gathered on the horizon, Hope and Remington sat on the porch, watching the lightning play across the distant mountains. The air was heavy with the promise of rain, the wind picking up as the storm approached. "I've been thinking," Hope said, breaking a comfortable silence, "about what you said about not knowing where to go next." Remington turned to her, curious. "And?" "You could stay," Hope said simply. "Not as a hired hand, as a partner in the ranch." Remington stared at her, caught off guard by the offer. "A partner?" Hope met his gaze steadily. "I've come to value your judgment, Remington, your work ethic, your company." A faint blush colored her cheeks at the last words. The ranch would do better with two people fully invested in its success. "Hope," Remington began, then paused, unsure how to express what he was feeling. "I'm honored by the offer, but I need to be honest. My feelings for you have grown beyond friendship or business partnership. If I stayed, it would be because I care for you deeply." The blush on Hope's cheeks deepened, but she didn't look away. "I know, I feel the same way." Remington reached for her hand, enfolding it in his own. "You deserve someone whole, Hope, someone who isn't haunted by the past." Hope squeezed his hand. "We're all shaped by our pasts, Remington. What matters is what we choose to do with our futures." She glanced down at the gun on his hip. "But as long as you carry that burden, you'll never be fully present in whatever future you choose." Before Remington could respond, the storm broke overhead, rain pouring down in heavy sheets. They hurried inside the main house, laughing as they shook water from their clothing in the entryway. The sudden intimacy of being inside Hope's home, their first time alone together indoors, was not lost on either of them. Remington was acutely aware of Hope's proximity, of the way her damp clothing clung to her form, of the raindrops glistening in her hair. "I should go," he said, his voice rough, "back to the bunkhouse." Hope shook her head. "You'll be soaked through. At least wait until the storm passes." She moved to the fireplace, adding wood to the banked coals and coaxing them into flames. "Come, get warm." Remington approached slowly, drawn to both the fire and the woman tending it. As he reached the hearth, Hope stood, turning to face him. They were close enough that he could see the individual droplets of rain still clinging to her eyelashes. "Hope," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. "Remington," she answered, and then she was in his arms, her lips meeting his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. The kiss deepened. Years of loneliness and longing pouring into the connection between them. Remington's hands tangled in Hope's hair, loosening her braid until the auburn waves fell freely around her shoulders. Hope's fingers traced the line of his jaw, her touch gentle yet insistent. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Remington rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you stand up to the sheriff in the saloon." Hope laughed softly. I've wanted you to do that since I saw you help that family with the broken wagon on the road to town last week. Such a simple act of kindness, but it showed me who you truly are beneath the gunslinger facade. Outside, the storm raged on, rain lashing against the windows, thunder rolling across the mountains, but inside, a different kind of storm was brewing, one of passion long denied, of two wounded hearts finding solace in each other. "Stay with me tonight," Hope whispered, "not just until the storm passes. Stay." Remington's answer was another kiss, deeper and more urgent than the first. Later, as they lay together in Hope's bed, Remington found himself telling her about the night James died, not just the facts she already knew, but the raw emotions he'd kept buried. The guilt he felt for not being there to protect his brother, the emptiness that had driven him to pursue vengeance, the hollow victory when he'd finally caught up to Jake Simmons. "After I killed him, I expected to feel something: relief, satisfaction, closure," Remington admitted. "But there was nothing, just more emptiness." Hope propped herself up on one elbow, her free hand gently tracing patterns on Remington's chest. "Vengeance can't fill the void left by loss. Only love can do that." Remington caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I'm beginning to understand that now." The following morning, they woke to clear skies and a sense of new possibilities. Over breakfast, they discussed the future of the ranch, of their relationship, of the ongoing conflict with Blackwater. "He'll make another move," Hope said, pouring coffee, "especially once he learns about us." "Let him," Remington replied. "We're stronger together than either of us is alone." Hope smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Yes, we are." That afternoon, as they rode out to check the herd, Remington found himself thinking about Hope's words regarding his brother's gun. It had been a part of him for so long, a physical reminder of his loss and his quest for justice. But now, with that quest fulfilled and a new life beginning to take shape, perhaps it was indeed time to lay that burden down. They were returning to the ranch when they spotted riders approaching Harold Blackwater and his sons, along with half a dozen ranch hands, all armed. Hope and Remington exchanged glances. "Looks like he's done waiting," Hope observed, her voice calm despite the threat approaching. "Stay behind me," Remington said, instinctively reaching for his gun. "No," Hope replied firmly. "We face this together, as equals." Blackwater and his men pulled up about 20 yards away, spreading out in a clear show of force. "Mrs. Anderson," Blackwater called, "I see rumors about you and the gunslinger here are true." "My personal life is none of your concern, Mr. Blackwater," Hope replied evenly. "What do you want?" "Same as always, this land." Blackwater gestured expansively. "Only now my offer has an additional condition. Your boyfriend there needs to leave the territory. Permanently." Remington felt a cold rage building inside him. "That's not going to happen, Blackwater." "No?" Blackwater smirked. "I've made some inquiries about you, Nash. Turns out there's still a warrant out for you in Kansas over that business with Simmons. One telegram to the right people, and you'll be facing a murder charge." Hope glanced at Remington, concern in her eyes. "Is that true?" "Possibly," Remington admitted. "I didn't exactly wait for the law to handle Simmons." "See, Mrs. Anderson," Blackwater said triumphantly, "you've tied yourself to a wanted man. Not the wisest choice for a woman in your position." "My position is that of a landowner defending what's rightfully hers," Hope replied, her voice steady. "And whatever Mr. Nash's past, he's a better man than you'll ever be. Harold Blackwater. Blackwater's face darkened with anger. I've tried to be reasonable, offered you fair market value, but my patience is at an end. He nodded to his men. Burn her out. One of the ranch hands produced a torch, already lit. Remington's hand went to his gun, but before he could draw, Hope placed her hand over his. There's always a choice, she reminded him softly. Then, to Remington's astonishment, Hope urged her horse forward, stopping halfway between their position and Blackwater's men. Think carefully about what you're doing, Harold, she called, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. You're about to commit arson and potentially murder in front of 9 witnesses. Even with your influence, that won't go unpunished. Who's going to stop me? Blackwater sneered. That useless sheriff. He knows which side his bread is buttered on. No, Hope replied calmly. The territorial marshal and the 3 deputies currently meeting with the Ranchers Association in town. The same marshal who, as we speak, is reviewing evidence of your cattle rustling activities provided by your former ranch hand, Tom Weber. Blackwater's face paled visibly. Weber wouldn't dare. He already has, Hope said, signed a full confession this morning in exchange for immunity. Apparently he didn't appreciate being left to take the blame if you were caught. Remington, catching on to Hope's strategy, moved forward to join her. The marshal seemed particularly interested in the connection between your rustling operation and similar activities in 3 other territories. Seems you've been busy, Blackwater. It was a bluff, at least partially. The marshal was indeed in town, but primarily to establish a permanent office. The Ranchers Association was real, as was Weber's confession, but the broader investigation was Remington's invention. Still, judging by Blackwater's expression, the bluff had hit close enough to home to be effective. You're lying, Blackwater said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Am I? Hope challenged. Are you willing to bet your freedom on that, your son's freedom? The Blackwater boys exchanged nervous glances. Clearly, they weren't as confident as their father had been. Pa, Ethan said quietly. Maybe we should... Shut up, Blackwater snapped, but the moment of intimidation had passed. His men were shifting uneasily in their saddles, looking to each other for guidance. Remington decided to press their advantage. You have a choice right now, Blackwater. Ride away and face whatever legal consequences come from Weber's confession or add attempted murder to your charges. Your call. For a tense moment, Remington thought Blackwater might choose violence. The older man's hand twitched toward his gun, his face contorted with rage. But in the end, self-preservation won out. This isn't over, Blackwater growled, gathering his reins. Not by a long shot. Yes, it is, Hope replied firmly. You've lost, Harold. Accept it with whatever dignity you have left. With a final glare, Blackwater wheeled his horse around and galloped off, his sons and most of his men following. 2 of the ranch hands, however, remained behind. Mrs. Anderson, one of them said, touching his hat respectfully, if you're hiring, we'd like to apply. We've had enough of Blackwater's way of doing business. Hope looked at Remington, a question in her eyes. He nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. We might have positions available, Hope told the men. Come by the ranch tomorrow and we'll discuss it. As the men rode off, Remington turned to Hope with newfound admiration. That was quite a bluff. I didn't know you had it in you. Hope laughed, her eyes sparkling. I told you 5 years teaching school. You learn to outmaneuver the bullies or they run right over you. Remington grinned, then grew serious. Blackwater was right about one thing, though. There might be legal consequences waiting for me in Kansas. Then we'll face them, Hope said simply. Together. The right way, through the law. Remington touched the pearl handle of his brother's gun thoughtfully. Maybe it's time I stopped running, faced up to what I've done, whatever the consequences. Hope reached over, placing her hand over his where it rested on the gun. That sounds like a man ready to lay down his burden. That evening, as the sun set over the Montana mountains, Remington and Hope stood together in the small family cemetery on the ranch property. Hope had suggested this place as appropriate for what Remington needed to do. Carefully, Remington removed his brother's gun from its holster. He held it for a long moment, feeling the weight of it in his hand, remembering all the times he'd seen James clean and care for the weapon. "I've carried you for too long, James," Remington said softly. "Carried the pain and the rage, but it's time to let that go now." Beside a small stone marker, Hope had helped him place a memorial to James. Though his body lay hundreds of miles away, Remington had dug a small, deep hole. Now he knelt and gently placed the gun inside, wrapping it carefully in an oilcloth to protect it from the elements. "I'm not forgetting you," he continued as he began to cover the gun with earth. "I'll never forget. But I'm choosing a different path now, a path I think you'd approve of." Hope knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder as he completed his task. When he was done, Remington remained there for a moment, his hand resting on the freshly turned earth. "Goodbye, brother," he whispered. As they walked back to the house hand in hand, Remington felt lighter than he had in months. The emptiness inside him wasn't gone. Grief never truly disappears, but it had transformed into something different, a space not defined by absence, but by new possibilities. "What happens now?" he asked Hope as they reached the porch. Hope smiled, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw with gentle fingers. "Now we build something together, something that honors those we've lost by choosing life instead of death, love instead of vengeance." Remington drew her into his arms, marveling at how right it felt to hold her. "I like the sound of that." 6 months later, on a clear autumn day, Remington Nash and Hope Anderson were married in the small church in Silver Creek. The Ranchers Association members attended in force, a show of solidarity and celebration. Even the territorial marshal was there, having worked out an arrangement whereby Remington would testify against larger criminal operations in Kansas in exchange for clemency on the Simmons matter. Harold Blackwater had indeed faced justice, currently serving time for his rustling operation. His sons had made peace with the new order of things, focusing on running what remained of their father's ranch legitimately. As for Remington and Hope, they had truly become partners in every sense, in love, in life, in the running of what was now the Anderson Nash Ranch. With the help of their new hands and the support of neighboring ranchers, the operation was thriving. On quiet evenings, they would sometimes visit the small cemetery together, placing wildflowers on the markers for both James and Henry, two men who, in different ways, had led them to each other. "Do you ever regret it?" Hope asked one night as they lay together, the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window. Laying down the gun, Remington pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Not for a moment. James gave me that gun to protect what matters. It took me a long time to understand that vengeance wasn't what he meant." "And now?" Hope prompted, her hand resting over his heart. "Now I know what truly matters," Remington said softly. "You, us, the life we're building. That's what's worth protecting." In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound carrying clearly through the Montana night. A reminder of the wildness that still existed in this land, even as civilization slowly tamed it. But here, in this house, in this moment, Remington Nash had found his peace, not in the barrel of a gun or the pursuit of vengeance, but in the arms of a woman who had taught him that the greatest strength lies not in the ability to take life, but in the courage to embrace it with all its pain and all its joy. And that, he knew, was a lesson worth learning, no matter how long or hard the path that led to it.